All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to AROYA Office Hours Live. My name is Keisha, and I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. A couple of reminders before we get started. This hour is your chance to hear from the experts, get answers in real time about data you're seeing with your grow, and share cultivation tips and tricks with other growers in this exciting industry. We thank everyone in advance for not using this time for things like airing policy or industry grievances or asking about AROYA pricing, although you are always welcome to book a demo, and we would love to talk more with you about that. Feel free to type your questions at any time in the chat. If your question is selected, we'll have you unmute yourself and go ahead and ask away. Plus, as a special treat, we're going to send an AROYA hat to anyone who asks a question for the first time during today's live session, and we are limiting that to U.S. residents and one hat per household. Jason and Seth, hello. Are you guys ready for our first question?
Sure are.
Excellent. And this is a very good one. This gets right to the meat of it. JG wants to know, can you describe a time when AROYA's sensors and or alert system saved a client's harvest?
I can, absolutely. And obviously there's a couple parameters that we can alert upon to help people keep things in check. And obviously any HVAC parameters are nice to have a backup on. And then even more importantly, sometimes is irrigation parameters, making sure that we don't have valves shutting down and solenoids failing. Every once in a while you'll catch a clogged emitter, less and less all the time now that people are doing a good job staying away from organics in their pressure compensated emitting systems. And specific one I'm thinking about, we had a client and he was doing some irrigation modifications on his injection system, and ended up he was flying out. I was actually meeting with him later that day off-site for a while, and it just happens that even as a really well-experienced cultivator and someone that spends quite a bit of time working with irrigation systems, he forgot to turn the manual master valve back on. And so I think it was briefly after he landed, he got an alert saying that the water content was going lower than it should for that day. And so he was able to call up a friend back home and get that valve turned back on, and it saved him 6 figures on a crop there.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of on a different note, I was talking to someone just this morning who's able to identify some problems with their wireless network on site because their Trollmaster wasn't able to communicate with the internet from its location. And the way they found that out was they got an alert that said, hey, you missed the last 4 irrigations yesterday, essentially. Your water content dipped below where it should have been last night. And then they got there and that kicked off a whole, well, the pump's working, the usual checklist, then go down to, oh, this is not responding on my phone app when I'm trying to tell it to water. Okay. It wasn't a complicated problem, but AROYA tipped them off and they got right on it rather than going a whole day without irrigating, for instance. And like Jason said, that'll save you a lot of money in this game.
Sometimes we talk with people and they actually justify the cost of AROYA based on a few crops they've lost in the past. And it is pretty realistic that it's a safeguard for protecting your investment. All that time into trying to grow, trying to produce a really, really healthy plant can be lost. Just a simple wire disconnection, Wi-Fi issues, human error happens to even the best of us. And so having a little bit of a backup is well worth the time, energy, and money to get a system like AROYA in place.
Absolutely. I can tell you a great example of a time where I didn't have it and trusted someone to turn the light timer back on after they sprayed. So we didn't know for about a week that we only had, 12 hours of light in our veg bay in the greenhouse rather than the 18 we're hoping for, because no one's there after the lights turn on because it gets hot. No one wants to work in the veg bay then. Well, a few weeks later, we're dealing with a bunch of pre-flowered moms and a couple whole rounds of really not quality clones. And if we had a system like AROYA at the time, it would have saved us months worth of headache for a 2-minute mistake that someone made when they just didn't flip a switch walking out of the room.
Yep. Don't underestimate the power of removing that guesswork, right?
Exactly. Redundancy is a beautiful thing sometimes.
Yep. Awesome. I'll ask our next question. We had a couple people just join us here. Welcome to Office Hours. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. We would love to address your questions live in real time. So let me move on to the next question here. This one comes from the chemical grower, also submitted through Instagram. They want to know what makes Terrace 12 better than other soil probes?
Yeah, Terrace 12 is based on 30 plus years of experience that Meter Group has developing sensors for environmental biophysics, for substrate analysis. We've got a lot of expertise based on it. And so there's specific technology. It is a capacitance-based sensor, and we've spent a ton of energy with other partners where, we OEM manufacture for a couple other companies that make similar devices, and they've gone through extraordinarily rigorous testing. And so it's been optimized for accuracy at some of the higher ECs, which some of the TDR sensors definitely struggle at doing. And I think it shows. I mean, it's proven in the data. We run some TDRs from competitors right next to our own Terrace 12s here in our test systems, and it doesn't take long to see that what we should be making decisions based on is a little bit more accurate technology. And one of the things that we're excited about in the future, as well as the energy that we spend with that expertise, making the next device. And so hopefully here we'll have another system that's coming out as far as substrate sensors that is even going to be a little bit better.
I know for me, on top of everything that Jason said, it was using some of these same sensors outside of cannabis applications before Meter was involved in this, and seeing that I could take one of these sensors and throw it on a remote station way out in the middle of nowhere, and it'll last a long time and still give me a reliable reading. To me, that's huge. If you're doing work at different sites, you've got sensors scattered all around. You don't want to spend time driving places just to calibrate a sensor because you're like, oh, it read funny today. And I have yet to have one be unreliable in the reading. I haven't found one that's actually off yet, unless, someone physically beat it with a hammer or something. And even then, they still read sometimes.
Yeah, and probably another thing is by bulk numbers, Meter Group has manufactured to date a little over 750,000 soil and substrate sensors. So it's given us a lot of opportunity to refine, improve, and build the best product that's available in the market.
Awesome. Jason, earlier you mentioned the competitive landscape a little bit. I have a question here from Randy Lyon, who asked, does AROYA make a smart valve controller to pair with Terrace sensor similar to GrowLink?
So currently, we do not offer a direct control module for a substrate sensor. And I'll kind of break this into two things. One of the projects that we are working on, we're very close to releasing. I think our QA on our open sprinkler integration should be done tomorrow. At that point, Scott and I will be doing some internal beta testing on it, making sure that we run across any bugs that we see before we do beta testing with development partners. So after 2 or 3 months, we plan to get that on the market and release it widespread. But as with anything in control, we want to do absolute due diligence, put it through the rigorous tests internally, and we're really excited about it. Basically, it's abstracting the open sprinkler interface to be working right out of AROYA. Some of the information that we're going to ask is the substrate volume that you're feeding into and the drip rate. And so most all that math is pretty simple to do outside of a system, but in AROYA, it's going to start tracking that in comparison to your irrigation events. So obviously we look at changes as a percent of volumetric water content in regards to the substrate size, and that's exactly what people use to make irrigation decisions as well. On top of that, anyone that's familiar with the AROYA system is used to using recipes. So breaking down your flower cycles into smaller manageable chunks where you have specified desired target parameters, desired irrigation schedules that might be a little bit different. And we're going to allow clients to build irrigation recipes or templates that align with each of those schedules so that you're not in there making multiple changes to valve configurations or irrigation timing when you go to switch from, say, vegetative to generative or back. So that's really kind of the first step where we're at, and we will be looking to optimize using some data scientists that we have. We've got some really cool guys that are working on irrigation projects here. And when we think about automating irrigation based on a set point, really what comes to mind is the fact that, hey, you might be getting a nighttime irrigation because you didn't irrigate properly yesterday. And what really needs to happen is, when we take these irrigation vents, when your crop's steering, it's not necessarily a real-time decision that should be made. It's basically planning out using an estimated transpiration rate from the day before and getting your shot sizes and irrigation window appropriately adjusted so your drybacks for the next day and your EC stacking or normalization occurs appropriately. And so, if we do have it at a specific set point, let's say, if we go under 40% we want to irrigate. Well, now we've got some accidental irrigations at night, which probably in some cases is actually less effective than not irrigating during that time period, letting it go slightly below that threshold, and then making the appropriate decision tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally automating a whole irrigation schedule is let me take that back. Automating the decision-making behind it is very, very difficult. That's one thing I run into a lot with people is like, okay, we've got a plan for, let's say, our first generative phase, weeks 1 through about 4, 1 to 3, depending on the strain. One thing you as a cultivator have to do is watch that graph, go look at your plants, and start probably adding either more shots or increasing your shot size as your plant grows. For instance, we can't just put one schedule out and say this is going to last this whole week. That schedule might realistically only be good for 2 days before we have to make some minute adjustments to keep our water capacity high enough. And especially like, let's say, rock wool, when we don't want to be continually losing that field capacity. So it's really cool that it's all coming out, but I think taking the grower out of the equation is not going to happen for quite a long time. It's still going to take dedication and a lot of hard work on the human part to produce quality product.
Yeah, so the steps that we're taking is to enable the best tools for those growers to make the decisions and implement the application as easy as possible. And for my personal standpoint, I come from a technology background and I love complete automation. If I trust some programming and I can use my brain power to be thinking about something else, use my time on something else, that's absolutely fantastic. And then in this scenario, it's where, real-time decision may not be the best for the plants. Analyzing the previous day's attributes, performance, trends over time is how someone can make the best decisions for tomorrow. And we are working on some mathematical models to really kind of make a suggestion on how that irrigation should happen based on previous trends.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's all coming along. It's just, it's a very big challenge, I think. That's the best way I can put it. It's been a long time coming, and I think we'll be improving it for a long time too, just as we learn more and we get more data about it. That's how all this seems to work. Once we put something out, we now have the power to develop it to be 5 times what we initially thought it would be, is everything I've experienced in this industry right now.
What I also heard in that response is that we are learning from our AROYA customers. So we're making changes and refinements based on real-time awareness of their needs. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And so I was looking at the numbers this morning, and out of the AROYA database, we have, I think it was a little over 26,000 Taros 12s that have been deployed under the AROYA umbrella directly. Historically, our server is running well over 10 billion data points, and we run some data science to anonymously attribute the similarities, differences amongst how all this stuff operates. And so really what it kind of comes down to is the different sets of parameters in any grow situation. And as we start to ask for those in the interface, it's really going to allow us to kind of tailor and say, hey, this is the general performance of a substrate this size in this type of environment. And one of one of my personal things that I'd love to try and get some really good prototypes and frameworks out there is thinking about strain performance libraries as well on the big scale.
The future is bright. It's exciting. Just a reminder to everybody who's on, we want to answer your questions. So let us know if you have anything, type it in the chat. I do have a question here from River City Growers. They want to know, what is the average dry grams? Oh, I actually have a question for Jody. River City Growers, we're going to get back to you in a second. Jody, you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. Sorry to interrupt there. My question is basically kind of continuation of what we were talking about last week, controlling nitrogen in flower. And so I've been thinking about that, and I ran up across something that I thought was interesting. In addition to plant tissue analysis, what about analysis of the sap? Maybe like on a weekly basis, and including that in your registration information.
I think that's absolutely a good idea. The more data you have, the better. I personally like the tissue analysis for making nutritional decisions because I'm looking at what's actually, being uptaken and fixed in the plant. When I'm looking at sap analysis, I'm seeing a huge list of carbohydrates and secondary metabolites. So over time, we can start to equate that towards like, all right, here's what we're getting on our sap analysis. Here's what the plant looks like. Here's our tissue analysis. What does this all mean? Okay, that ends with a certain chemotype, basically. We have figured out what the plant tells us when we grow it this way. And when we compile more of that data and grow the plant in a slightly different way, we can see how those values would be affected and see where we can steer our decisions based on those. But it just depends on what you're looking for. Tissue analysis, bang for your buck, is going to help you make nutritional decisions, I think, easier.
Interesting. Okay, well, that's good to know, because if you're talking to someone who's trying to sell you sap analysis, of course, they're going to tell you that they're the best game in town and tissue analysis is the old way and it doesn't yield any useful information, etc. So it's always good to hear the opinion of someone who actually has experience with it.
Thanks. Yeah, I personally, the more data you can get, the better. But at the end of the day, everyone in production right now has a production budget and a budget for tools and research. And unfortunately, everything costs money. So if you're having to choose, I would go with the tissue analysis. If you can, have your cake and eat it too, as many tests as you can get, as long as they are, like the SAP test, you're still getting good data from that and it's easily repeatable. Something you're going to be doing regularly that you can, start to lean in on that data once you have it.
At what interval do you think doing those labs would be? I mean, not that there's an unlimited budget, because there isn't, but if there was, at what interval would you do that? I mean, do you think weekly is adequate?
I think most commercial cultivators, weekly is pretty well adequate. I mean, in a perfect world, you'd have a lab right there in-house and you'd go cut a part of a leaf, take it in and analyze it.
Sure.
You'd go pull some sap and analyze it that day. But most of the time, weekly changes are what you're going to be making, so that's a good time to get that analyzed.
Great. Thank you, guys, as always.
Yep, thanks for the question, man.
Yeah, Jody, thanks for asking the questions. Good to see you again. Nice having you on the session again. Reminder, everybody's on. Be sure to type your question in the chat. We're going to get it answered for you. All right, I'm going to go back to River City Growers' question. They want to know, what is the average dry grams per square foot users can expect? And I'm assuming that they are asking about AROYA users. So they want to know, what is the average dry grams per square foot they can expect?
We don't really like to shoot for a number. We like to talk about performance improvements on that, because the range of growers that I've worked with, I've gone into places that are getting 15 grams per square foot, and I've gone into places that are, at the pretty good rate of, say, 70, maybe even a little bit more before they implement AROYA. And so attributing an average to that really doesn't give us much information on the industry. There's so many variables in between there, as far as some people are running in a hoop house, some people are running indoor, and maybe if we break it down a little bit farther, we could think about averages there. But yeah, as far as a improvement, if you're not getting 10%, then you need to spend some more time with our client success managers and really attribute what in the system can make the biggest advantages for data-driven growing. Usually there's something even the best growers can absolutely improve based on looking at the data, reading the trends, tailoring in their consistencies and uniformities across the crops. And so, yeah, we do want to help you guys as much as possible. I don't think I've ran into anybody that saw a decrease because they were making better decisions from the data.
Not if they were making good decisions based on the data. I have seen people make the wrong decision. That will happen, but that's a personal problem on their part.
And I think, to that point, that's one of the reasons that AROYA, as a group and a company, spends so much energy putting this education out here. This is why we spend this time every week trying to get on the hot topics. What are things that most people can do to get them pointed right direction? It's why we go build out our resource pages on the AROYA website, and it's why we spend time with our clients all the time, getting as much information to them as we can, whether it be in the personal client success meetings, whether it be unpublished material.
Yeah, Turp Total Farms, you just posted a comment. You want to speak to it?
Nice.
Oh yeah, no, that's what we like to see. I was going to say, honestly, for numbers, that 40 to 80 range is where a lot of people come in, maybe down close to 30. And then typically we try to go up from there. Really what AROYA brings to the table, though, is looking at that 80, figuring out everything that happened to get that, and then pinpointing where you can make improvements. Because if you're at 80, you're already killing it pretty good. I mean, you're doing a dang good job, but looking at your facility, we might be able to fine tune it and get you those extra few grams here or there that each round, little improvement adds up.
Yeah, that's a great point. It kind of reminded me of an anecdote working with a client there in Northern California, and coming in, he's a fantastically experienced grower, been growing for 30 plus years. He's got his operation pretty well dialed in. And as it is, so many growers like to talk about their best yielding rather than what they get across, say, 5 or 10 harvest group averages. And we're always really proud of what we hit as human beings. We want to talk about what we do best. And for him, it wasn't necessarily a top number increase for his yield weight per grams per square foot per harvest group. But what happened was he was able to bring up all of his harvest groups pretty close to that level. And so when he looks at the total amount of improvement, it doesn't come from just, hey, we made 20% more last harvest group. It comes down to saying, hey, we made 20% more over the last 10 harvest groups.
Yep, consistently. And now we can take that to our marketing people and say, hey, we have a believable number to give you every month for what you're going to have to sell. That's the ultimate end there, is like that consistency. I mean, how much money can your business lose if you can't accurately plan your product output? If it's all over the place every month, that introduces a pretty big variable. So even just stabilizing that and having a slight upward trend can make a huge difference in your cash flow at the end of the day.
Absolutely. When I was cultivating, I think that was the most important thing I did, was deliver projectable numbers based on historic yields. So I break things down by what cultivars are yielding what weight per plant. Ask the sales teams what do you want on the shelf in 6 months, and really get started on it with your propagation teams. It's going to make things quite a bit easier. You can reduce clone waste. Track your survival rates through clones, or if you are selective cloning, say, hey, we only want to waste the bottom 10% of extra clones. So that kind of comes down to an operational standpoint, way beyond just the cultivation. Everybody's lives can be easier if we think about making it a smoother transition, saying, well, we know how to get that 600 pounds of OG Kush. We need to grow this many plants with a little bit of a buffer for that survival rate or that selective cloning procedure, and don't grow more than that. Grow the right stuff that your sales team's going to utilize.
Yep, and using data-driven decisions, you can capture that consistency to a point where you can build that brand reliability. I think that everyone's looking for right now, because I don't know about you, Jason, but if I go to the store and I get something that's particularly not good, I remember that label. Like, I'm not going to buy that one again if I get burned once, and that might not be a good representation of the product those people are capable of putting out. You know, in fact, most of the time it probably isn't. You probably did get a fluke. But that's kind of how marketing goes, and how people think about a product when they walk into a store and they have, you know, depending where you're at, 40, 60, 100 choices. You know, or that's the way the market's becoming. It's getting competitive out there.
As the person who lives in California, I can absolutely vouch for that statement. I mean, as a consumer, it's a nice problem to have.
Right.
But it's a lot. It's crowded. It's crowded out there. Okay, so I have another question here that we got through Instagram. And just a reminder, anybody who's on with us today, feel free to type your question in the chat. AR asked about if I experience any tech issues with my sensors or the AROYA platform, where do I go for help?
support.aroya@metergroup.com, or you can give us a call on our support line number.
You can also fill out a support request form or a error form if you go to the resource center at the bottom left of your dashboard. It's the big question mark, and I finally just realized this the other day because I hadn't used it on my laptop as much as my bigger screen, but you do have to scroll down inside that menu to get to the support form. Did it on my small screen. I was like, where the heck is this? Oh, okay. So,
and that's, I mean, I should have said that first because it is our preferred way to capture information from you. We'll get a screen video share when you do that of your session, and so it's super easy for us, you know, without a lot of detail to see exactly what's going on, what experiences you're going through, and then we can provide some of the interface coding back to our software team to try and diagnose it if it is a bug or something technically that we need to address. And we always encourage people to seek out answers as well on your own. You know, if it's just a question regarding how the software performs, use that resource center, watch some of the tutorials based on the area of the interface that you're working on, and you might even learn something that you didn't know that it's capable of doing, aside from helping resolve any issues.
Yep, and you can always reach out to your client success manager, either myself or Noah, depending on your region. If you're already in communication with us and you've got more hardware and software questions that, you know, like, hey, we're meeting to talk about growing, but this is only going to take 5 minutes, that's totally fine too.
Great, thank you. And of course, office hours. This is a great opportunity to address any tech questions. Anybody's having any issues, got questions about how anything works. That's what we're here for. We want to answer those for you. I've got a couple of questions from Instagram. One user named HighFuelOG submitted a few crop steering questions. Seth and Jason, you want to get into that real quick?
Sure do.
All right. HighFuelOG wanted to know, when pushing temps down in later flower, do you recommend just doing so during nighttime?
That's going to be a little bit strain dependent. I like to drop the temps in the day a little bit as well. Probably not quite as much as you are going to overnight. Usually the advantages that we can get from inducing that nighttime differential is, one, it helps produce the anthocyanin, which is responsible for the purple in color in things like raspberries and blueberries, and ironically also responsible for a lot of the coloring in cannabis products as well. So, you know, that would be one reason. Another reason is thinking about how assimilates are sourced and synced through the plant. So kind of working with the plant physiology to induce the largest plant that we can. And so assimilates typically sink to the warmest parts of the plant So later in flower, you do have some bud mass in there. That bud mass is more dense. It's going to retain a little bit daytime heat longer than the rest of the plant. And so it's going to become a sink for assimilates, which is really where we want as much of the plant energy and growth chemicals to be going to during that time.
Yep. Nighttime temperatures are a big way the plant knows how to move different metabolites around, really. I mean, even in veg, if you ran a 24-hour veg, you might notice okay growth, but your plant does still need to sleep. That's the time that it moves carbohydrates around. It's not focused on production, it's focused on storage. The other thing, Jason, you nailed it with the anthocyanin production. One thing I have been noticing, though, is it doesn't seem necessary to keep your room, you don't need to go 76 to 66 at lights off. You can taper that down throughout the night and not, spend so much time fighting your HVAC system to make that happen. So as long as we get, like a little over 2 hours down at that 10-degree overnight diff, where differential will be pretty good as far as getting that expression. And then, the other thing is later in flowers, some people I've noticed have a tendency to want to run in, the low 70s in the daytime as well. And really that's going down towards the bottom end of where we're getting good respiration in the plant. So cellular activity starts to slow down below a certain point. That's not what we want to have happening in the daytime. We still need those plants to be active and ripening for us. There are chemical processes going on that take energy. Things move slower when it's colder. So there's a hard point of diminishing returns on dropping your temps later in flower.
That's great. Turp Turtle Farms, you posted a comment. You want to speak to it, or do you want me to read it? We'd love to hear from you. Here's what he posted here. And the root zone temp, bring that feed temp down to 65, and it makes a big difference, especially if you can't bring the room temps too low. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you do always want, preferably if you can have your tank in a room and stay at 65, that makes a big deal. And even in vegetative steering early on, if you have your water going in at 65 and we're going on to, 10 liters of media plus on top of a slab, our little shots are not cooling that off super quick. So it is nice to go in with a little colder water so that we're not putting too cold water on the plant. And then also recognizing that, bringing the root zone temp down is nice, but it's also something we can't totally focus on during vegetative steering just because it's warm in the room. But I agree. Bringing that down definitely helps quite a bit later in flower, especially when our temps are already approaching that at night.
Along those lines, High Fuel OG also wanted to know what bottom end temps do you recommend when doing that temp lowering? So it sounds like they want to lower.
Yeah, I usually wouldn't go lower than 67.
I was going to say the exact same number off the top of my head. On the other hand, though, I've pulled plants down here in Eastern Washington in October, and it was definitely colder than 67 at night. We were, covering them so they didn't get frostbite, essentially. There again, optimal temperature versus what the plant can actually tolerate, there's a pretty big range. So just like if we're talking about EC towards the end of flower, is there what we'd like to see? Yes. The difference between overfeeding and, causing nutrient toxicities to your plant is that there's, again, a huge margin there. So,
yeah, to me, that number comes into mind kind of on a very general spectrum. I encourage, as I say, almost every session that we do of these is take notes on your harvests. Strain dependent, you can really make some improvements by recognizing the preferences, the growth preferences of that plant as far as how it performed the best. Did we get a little bit more color out of our white truffles when we went to 65 at night instead of 67? That's getting past the details that we can dig into here. So that's just a very general number that we like to work off of as a basis while you are doing continuous improvement for strain performance.
Yeah, and make sure your facility can do it without molding out your plants. That's the final piece of that puzzle. If you're going to lose plants to mold, just to try to achieve that, 10-degree overnight differential, it's not worth it. Unless you like throwing product away, but I don't think any of us, that's no one's goal here.
No, never. The third question from High Fuelology, and you may have touched on this, but want to go ahead and ask it directly here. When do you recommend starting those temp drops? And they say, thank you.
Nice. Well, thanks for the questions, man. I like to kind of just phase it into 3, if you will. Say, the first third of flour, run very little, so less than 5-degree temp differential. It can really just be the same temp throughout night, day for that first third of the harvest group cycle. So if you were a 9-week cycle, first 3 weeks, then I like to drop about a 5-degree differential for the second, third weeks, and then say usually around a 10-degree differential for the last third weeks.
Great. Zach is on and he had a question. Zach, you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Hey guys, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for being on here.
Thanks, appreciate it. So I got 2 questions for you. What is the best way to clean the sensors? And the second one would be, what is your experience? Are sensors better in square pots or round pots? Or does it matter?
Yeah, and these are very applicable. You can use isopropyl alcohol on the sensors. You could use, hydrochloric acids, something like a Zerotol or a Cleanse. If you really need to break down some of the growth on there, you can soak it overnight. Just throw the sensor head itself, the Teros with the prongs, into a shallow bucket of some type of solvent. The epoxy we use is very resistant to most any of the chemicals that are available in your facility. As far as round pots versus square pots, absolutely square pots. So when we talk about probably one of the biggest issues of data variance, so not necessarily as accurate as it should be, is when those prongs have some air showing on it. So the Teros 12 has 3 prongs, and those prongs are reading the water in the air along the entire length of the prong. And so when we're stuck into a round pot, and I guess you can't see it when I go like that, like it would be, but that round pot is going to have a little bit of air typically just on the outside 2 prongs, as that flat surface is trying to conform to the circular, that round edge. And so in any type of plastic round hard pots, we recommend people actually cut out a rectangle the size of the Teros 12 head so that it can sit flush in there. You can do this preferably before you even fill the pot. Throw a piece of tape over it if you're worried about substrate pouring out, and then you can either stick the Teros 12 onto that tape, which will keep it nice and secure in this pot, or you can actually just puncture right through that tape as well. So that's how we recommend going into round hard pots. I personally prefer prepackaged medias, so things like rock wool, really easy, very consistent installation in rock wool, and then compressed cocoa, let's say 1.5, 2 gallon compressed cocoa bags, also a very easy installation after they've saturated up.
All right, excellent, thank you.
Yeah, and just to touch on that a little bit, you can, Zach, use just Dawn dish soap and water on your prongs if you want. Just soaking in that for even a couple minutes will usually break up the salt on the prongs, I've found. But it is always best practice to wipe them down with some type of sanitizing solution, whether that's alcohol, Sanidate, some other kind of solvent, but wipe it down, don't dunk it in a bucket. Still remember, it's an expensive radio transmitter, and you don't really want to ruin it by holding it underwater till the bubbles stop. There shouldn't be any bubbles, but I wouldn't risk it if I spent the money on it.
And then also, we do typically recommend to avoid abrasives on there. It is a medical grade stainless steel, but anytime that you're using abrasives, it can alter the surface profile of that metal, which can slightly affect some of the readings that are being taken by it.
Cool, thank you, appreciate it, guys.
Mm-hmm.
We add one more to this real quick.
Yeah.
So with the EC sensor installation, how how would you guys suggest getting the best reading? Because sometimes with the T-traps we've drawn out, they're not getting as much water as we need to get a full reading.
Gotcha. Are you running those like as a runoff into your trap? You have a trap in your runoff or into your feed?
Yeah, we put a trap underneath in the drain line.
Gotcha. So you can go with like a U-shaped trap, or personally, this kind of sounds weird, but you can get a bucket, drill a hole in the side of that bucket, run a line out of the bucket several inches deep, and then drop the probe in there. Create a settling basin, essentially. Yep, and then it's also easy to pull that probe out if you're ever like, wow, is it really reading that high? You can pull it out and clean it easy enough without having to drain a line.
Cool, thank you.
Yep.
Awesome, Zach. Thank you so much for submitting your question. And if you can stick around for another minute after the broadcast ends, I definitely want to collect your info so we can send you an AROYA hat. I have asked all the questions submitted so far this week. Seth and Jason, anything else you want to cover while we have a few more minutes? Anything on your mind? No?
Nothing terribly really killing me this week, other than I'm really excited about this open sprinkler. We'll be testing it this week.
Coming week. Probably the second most fun thing that we get to do next to directly working with clients, going and seeing them, talking about what we can do to help them perform better is working internally with our company, prototyping and understanding what we can do to help our product perform better based on our experience cultivating. Let's apply a product how we would have wanted to use it when we were directly hands-on on the day-to-day basis, and get the feedback to our dev teams so that we can make it as effective as possible when it hits the market.
Excellent. Yeah, no, this is it. Thank you guys both, Seth and Jason, as usual. Great conversation. Jody and Zach, thank you so much for your questions. Jody has a hat. Zach, stick around for just a minute. And thank you to everybody who joined us today. I mean, this is what Office Hours is about, just really being a resource for all of you. If you have any questions about AROYA, how it can be used to improve your cultivation production process, and any other topic you'd like covered in a future Office Hours session, post it in the chat, shoot us an email at support.aroya@metergroup.com, or send us a DM on Instagram. We definitely want to hear from you. We record every session. We'll email everyone in attendance a link to the video from today's discussion. It'll also live on the AROYA YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, and share, please, while you're there. And if you find these conversations helpful, please do share them with your network and spread the word. Otherwise, we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Office Hours. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks
for
Keisha.
coming, guys. Thanks,
everyone.
Keisha.
Sure.
The questions are great. Let's keep doing it. Keep them coming.